everybody. You're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
And I'm Steve Morey.
And on this particular show, we have two very distinct segments. On the first part of the show, I will be interviewing Andy Mangels. Andy's a man of many credits, but the one that he's on here specifically to talk about is his role as the writer of the recent Wonder Woman 77 Meets The Bionic Woman miniseries that was recently published by Dynamite and DC, has recently been collected as a trade paperback, and we get into some other areas of Andy's long career. And then after that, all three of us will be back, and we'll be talking about two recent movies which you may have heard about that were recently released. One is Thor Ragnarok, and the second, Justice League. As per our norm, you're going to hear an explosion, then my interview with Andy, another explosion, and then we'll be back for some movie talk. Okay, we're going to get the show going with the first segment, and the first segment involves an interview with somebody that I am really happy we are finally bringing to the show. Andy Mangels is a USA Today best-selling author and co-author of over 20 fiction and nonfiction books, including books related to the Star Wars, Star Trek, and X-Files franchises, hundreds of comic books, over 40 documentaries, and thousands of magazine articles worldwide. As an Inkpot award-winning pop culture historian and owner of one of the world's largest Wonder Woman collections, he has appeared in 5 Wonder Woman documentaries, spoken about her at colleges and conventions, and has written about the character for nearly 30 years. Andy is here to talk about the recent Wonder Woman 77 Meets The Bionic Woman series that he wrote for DC and Dynamite, and it has recently been collected in a trade. Andy, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. I'm really happy to have you on.
Great to be here, Bill, and happy to finally be doing something with the Comic Book Bears.
That's fantastic. Now, you have been a very familiar name to me for a long time. My exposure to you goes back to the Focus on Perez and Amazing Heroes articles. If you wanted to give an elevator pitch regarding yourself, why don't you tell people what some of your credits are?
Well, you kind of gave a good overview there. I have generally called myself a pop culture I generally am a pop culture writer. Almost everything that I've done in my career has been about the intersection of film and television and comics, starting back in the old days with Amazing Heroes and other fan magazines, when I would write the news review and gossip columns about what was coming up in, at that point, the very few comic book films and television shows that were on the air, to eventually when I started writing for those franchises, starting out with Star Wars and then moving into Star Trek and X-Files and writing stuff for DC and for Marvel and so forth. So I've really, for anybody who's been around the last 40 years, I've gotten to write some of the soundtracks of their lives. I even wrote a Child's Play with Chucky the Killer Doll, and I wrote Nightmare on Elm Street comics, and I've written Jason comics, and so I've done horror, I've done comedy, I've done science fiction and superheroes. It's been kind of a wild ride.
Right, and also because we are an LGBT themed podcast, why don't you also tell us about your involvement regarding Gay Comix, to specify comics with the X there?
Very early on in my career, I did an article for Amazing Heroes magazine, which was the leading news magazine in the comic book industry at the time. And the article was in the summer of 1988 called Out of the Closet and Into the Comics, Gays in Comics, the Creations and the Creators. And it was a huge multi-part article that ran in 2 issues that examined how the comic book world treated both GLBT characters and GLBT creators. And at that point, nobody who I interviewed in the mainstream comic world was willing to be out and open about who they were. There were people in the underground comics world who were like Howard Cruz, who founded Gay Comix, the anthology series, Robert Tripto, and others who were in the underground comic scene, but they weren't really doing anything for mainstream comics or even in the early independent comic world. So at the end of the article, I came out, and that summer I ran the first Gays in Comics panel at San Diego Comic-Con, which they had no idea how it would do, and ended up being one of their largest panels of the year. I ran that panel for 25 years, then took 4 years off, And then this year I returned for the 30th anniversary of that panel. So it's now the longest running comic book panel in history, and I've run 26 out of the 30 years. In the process, have become kind of, I guess now after 30 years, I'm the granddad of the of the gay comic scene. But that led to co-founding a group called Prism Comics, which works on behalf of gay and lesbian creators and promoting gay and lesbian comics and so forth, and other organizations and groups along the way.
Great. Now, again, the reason that I called you regarding coming onto the show for the interview was the collected trade for Wonder Woman 77 Meets the Bionic Woman. And as I alluded to in the introduction, you're not exactly a civilian when it comes to Wonder Woman. So was Wonder Woman your first comic book experience, or was there something else that led you into that?
My first comics actually in the 1960s. I was born in 66, and so the first comic that I recall owning was a very early Teen Titans comic, a killer called Honey Bun. And it was the Teen Titans versus a giant robot that looked kind of like a water tower. And that was kind of like an explosion of excitement for me. My dad had some comics around. I remember like an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. comic and a Hulk comic. It's probably Tales to Astonish, actually. And a few others, but the Teen Titans comic just completely held my interest, and I loved not just the characters in the comic, but then I saw the ads, and there's a thing called Direct Currents, which was kind of like, here's what comics are coming up this month, and they had little previews of comics there, and there were ads for other comics and so forth. And that's, I believe, the first time I saw Wonder Woman was in one of those ads, and immediately kind of became intrigued and smitten by the character. Wonder Woman was one of the most influential characters for me growing up. Wonder Woman kind of represented the ultimate mother / big sister figure for me. And unlike every other superhero on the planet, basically, she represented a character who chose her destiny and who chose to do what she wanted to do for the good of mankind. She wasn't caused by a disaster. She wasn't caused by dead parents. She wasn't caused by a dead planet. She wasn't picked at random by a radioactive spider. She wasn't in an accident. She developed her powers. She chose to go out and fight for good. And not only that, but she chose to fight for truth, and she chose to fight for everyone, not just certain types of people. And as a young kid who knew he was gay, very, very early on, even though I didn't know what it meant, I still knew that I was different, and that what I was not going to be accepted by society or even family. It was really important to me to have a character who I could look up to, who I knew would love me unreservedly, even though I knew she was fictional. It was still somebody who I could say, this is someone who would love me if she were real. Mm-hmm. And then when the TV show started, she became real. Linda Carter was the perfect embodiment of the character, and that was exactly what the character she played was, somebody who literally did love everyone and who really tried to do her best by everybody.
So with you coming into comics, when Wonder Woman was being published when you first got in, are we at the Diana Prince as Emma Peel period, or was she still costumed?
By the time I started buying the Wonder Woman comics, it was just about the time she got back into her costume.
Okay.
That was because I was unable to buy comics until I got old enough to get an allowance and start earning money and so forth. But so I would get them from friends and trade and read each other's comics and so forth. So one of my earliest comics, Wonder Woman comics that I recall, was the one where she's got her hand over her face and she's like, "No, I don't know if I can rejoin the Justice League." And it was one of these things where where the fact that, even this character who was so powerful was still like doubting herself and still wanted to prove that she was worthy and things like that. That said all sorts of things that none of the male characters ever did something like that. That vulnerability actually spoke to me even more as a kid, because I was like, yeah, this is what I have to do every day in life. I have to prove that I'm good enough, because I always knew that there was a secret in my life that was telling me I wasn't good enough.
How exactly did you get involved with this particular project, the Wonder Woman 77 Meets Bionic Woman? Was that something that you pitched, or was that a meeting of the minds between the licensees, or more specifically the comic book publishers, in one case that held a license? Was that something you were approached, or something you approached them about?
It actually, the origin story for this actually began at the as a kid, and then jump forward to the start of my career. As a kid, when I was watching Wonder Woman and The Bionic Woman and other shows of that time period, that was the time when certain dolls and then action figures were just starting to come into vogue, with the Star Wars action figures and things like that. And then Miko had their lines of dolls and Kenner and so forth. I didn't get to play with a lot of those. I wanted to, but my parents would not let me buy dolls. So I think the only Mikos I ever had was Captain America and the Joker, because for some reason those had masculine enough that they would let me play with those, but not Wonder Woman or the Bionic Woman, But I would still play, and I would make paper dolls, and I'd have cutouts of characters, and I would make up stories in my mind as to what would happen if. And as a kid, that's very natural. You take your Star Wars, your Luke Skywalker action figure and have them play with a G.I. Joe, and they have adventures. And in your mind, it totally makes sense. There's not the logic of, well, why would Luke Skywalker from a galaxy far, far away be having an adventure with G.I. Joe from modern day America? That doesn't exist. You're just purely telling a story of adventure and what would happen with these characters. So there was always this element in my mind of like, why didn't these characters ever meet? What would happen if they had met? They're so alike. It was interesting that on both TV shows, the characters were fairly similar in tone. They were both very loving characters. They both used their strength for good. They were never show-offs with it. They were kind of fighting for the same types of things, as opposed to just fighting the bad guys. And they were both compassionate at a time when other characters weren't. Other characters were avenging. They were being compassionate with the villains, and they were compassionate with the victims and so forth. So tonally, the characters really fit well together. The very start of my career, you mentioned the focus on George Perez's book, which is the first thing that I ever had published was in that book. That was actually led to because I was in a Teen Titans fan club called Titan Talk. And this is in the mid-'80s. And I was in that with several other people who were all huge Teen Titans fan, and many of them wanted to work in the business. And that included Rob Liefeld and Hank Knopf. And Rob and Hank and another gentleman had suggested that I contact Fantagraphics because I was a huge George Perez fan, and said, hey, I let me work on this book with you, and I can provide some stuff. And that did indeed lead to my first published work, and then further work in Amazing Heroes. But I stayed friends with both Rob and Hank through all the years. So fast forward to 3-4 years ago, and I had been back and forthing with Hank Knopf, and he said, hey, we have a project coming up that I think you would be the absolute perfect person for. Would you be interested in pitching something? And I was like, absolutely. If I'd be the perfect person, what is it? Diana Prince, agent of IADC? And there was dead silence. Which was kind of like, oh my God, that's it. That's it, isn't it? You're going to do the Wonder Woman TV comic. And so, of course, he didn't tell me anything. And then a few months later, he got back to me and goes, he says, "Yep, that's what this is. Let me get you in touch with the editor," and so forth. And so I wrote a proposal for Wonder Woman 77. At that point, they hadn't solidified their plans for it. They didn't know if it was going to be a digital comic or a regular comic or what. Mm-hmm. But wrote up a proposal for the first year of adventures, and at the end of it, I said, let's have the end of year one lead into a crossover with Dynamite and do Wonder Woman meets the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. And then I said, plot, it's like printing money. That was literally what I said for the plot. It's like printing money. Well, the regular series for Wonder Woman 77 did end up going to another writer, but I kind of didn't give up on the concept, and eventually I went back to Hank and I said, so I didn't get Wonder Woman 77, but what about the idea of this crossover? And so Hank went to Dynamite and the editor at DC, Jim Chadwick, and all of them kind of back and forth, and eventually on Christmas Eve of, this is 2 years ago, I guess, 2015, Hank sent me a message on Facebook, and it says, "Merry Christmas, your book's been approved." And so then it was like immediately jump into figuring out exactly what the book would be and what it would entail and so forth. And that was a crazy process because everything I'd wanted to do as a child now came tumbling forward in my head, and suddenly everything that I wanted to do, in 6 issues would be impossible. And yet I knew, well, this might be my only chance ever to write this. I've got to put in as much as I can. So some people have said the story is a little overstuffed, that there's like everything under the sun in it. Mm-hmm. And I will actually cop to that a bit, that it's, I put everything I could into it because I wanted this to be the ultimate story, not just, well, this is a good story. I wanted this to be like, this is everything I could ever want.
Right. And if I can editorialize a little bit, just letting you know, Andy, I read everything DC Universe. There is that terminology out in fandom as a Marvel zombie. I'm the closest thing to a DC zombie as you can find. And naturally, that includes the tie-ins with other crossover properties. And I think a pitfall that some people fall into is that they spend so much time treating the project as a love letter to what they like about those properties that the story suffers in some context. That never was the case here. And I absolutely loved the pacing of it, when certain characters came in, who certain characters ended up being. Spoiler, at least for 2 of them. Right. And I think you really can pat yourself on the back because the novelty, for lack of a better word, of having these 2 characters meet and wanting to show that you have this long-abiding affection for both of them, it never got in the way of the propulsion of the story. And as someone who reads a lot of crossovers like that, I can tell you that's rare.
Well, thank you. There are a lot of pitfalls to deal with this. And, as much as I appreciate what you said, there are people who felt like I did just the opposite, where I fell into too much of that. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that the majority of the people who feel that I went too far, things like that, are people who have almost no knowledge, of the character. And generally, the book got reviewed a lot, and if the review started out with, "I confess that I have barely watched the TV shows," or "I confess that I don't know these characters real," or "I confess," the moment they said "I confess," it was almost like, I'm going to give this a bad review, and it's because I know nothing about it. And I also, back when I used to do reviews, if I started out a review that way, I confess, I would still try to make a point of saying what's good or bad about the project with no knowledge, but understanding that it's not for me. There are a lot of genres out there that aren't necessarily for me, and I wouldn't presume to say, oh, well, these are horrible just because I don't like that genre. Mm-hmm. anyhow, but I appreciate that. I appreciate that you felt that way. And there were a lot of people who I think agreed with you, and I'm really happy that I was able to achieve that.
Also, with the book, were you as familiar with the Bionic Woman mythology as you were with Wonder Woman, or did that take a little bit of ramping up again?
Well, it was. I grew up in Montana, in this town that only had 1.5 TV stations. We had one main station that showed 2 networks on it, and then we would sometimes receive signals from another TV station that was the 3rd network. And then we had a UHF channel coming over from Spokane. And so watching anything regularly was tough, because sometimes the station would only show the NBC shows, and sometimes it would show the ABC shows, and so forth. And so there were many of the Wonder Woman and Bionic Woman things that I never saw till I was an adult, or at least till they were in reruns. Mm-hmm. And so it made it there are certain shows that I have watched over and over and over and over and over, and I know like the back of my hand, and then there's other episodes where I've only seen them once or twice, because A, they didn't do it for me, or B, they were I only saw them later on VHS mm-hmm. or on DVD or something. So with Bionic Woman, I was very much a fan of the early Bionic Woman stuff. The later Bionic Woman shows I didn't see as much when I was younger, so those I saw more when I was an adult. But because of when this story is set, which was basically right between or around the time the 2nd and 3rd seasons of each show, it enabled me to kind of pick a point to say, here's where we are in continuity. Here's who they're involved with. Here's what the characters have been through, and here's what they haven't been through. And so I was able to kind of build touchstones around that. Jaime's already faced the fembots twice, and she's pretty annoyed that they keep using Callahan's face every time she mm-hmm. sees them. And Max is at this point in Max the Bionic Dog. He's at this point in his development, and Diana hasn't moved to Los Angeles yet, so she's at this point in her career, and so I mean there were these things where I was able to kind of say, here's where we are in continuity, and one of the things that I know frustrates fans when they do these types of crossovers is when people don't pay attention to continuity, mm-hmm. And they just kind of set the story. They just tell a story that it has no bearing on what's happened before or what's happened since. And that's how you come up with characters who have powers that suddenly they never had before, or where you've created a family member that didn't exist before, or where there's mm-hmm. Where it's clear that someone has I've watched 3 episodes of this show, or I've watched this movie twice, or something like that, and then suddenly they're writing it with only the barest knowledge of what those characters are about.
Right. It's interesting the thing you said about how the 2 shows were so similar. Now I'm thinking about there's other factors that are, some are just so esoteric, like a network switch for both of them. And right. Also, what I think was a very important concept that was in both series is you had a male superior confidant, superior right. in the forms that they reported to the people, that mm-hmm. wasn't a romantic interest, mm-hmm. At least in the form of Steve Trevor Jr. Yeah. And naturally Oscar Goldman. So now there's things about the series, they were much more similar than I thought. Because there was this resistance in me to identify characters like Steve Austin and Jaime Sommers as superheroes.
Right.
The older I get, the more relaxed I get about that, I would have to say. Mm-hmm. There's a number of other factors there that there's a lot of alignment that I wasn't even considering until you brought that up.
Right, and they both worked for government agencies. The big difference, and I actually spotlight this in the series, the big difference between Diana and Jaime, there's 2. One is the secret identity, and the other is science versus magic. Mm-hmm. And the secret identity thing is something that Jaime doesn't broadcast who she is, that she has her bionic powers or anything like that, but she also doesn't lie to everybody under the sun about it. Mm-hmm. And when, very early on in the series, she actually kind of confronts Diana about that. Like, why are you lying to everybody? Isn't there anybody that you trust? Why don't you trust people with somebody with this information? And so that becomes kind of an interesting counterpoint between the two of them. That here's a character who's about truth, and yet she's hiding, the fact that she's Wonder Woman from everybody around her. The other is the science versus magic, and this is, I think, a really fun thing to play within the series, which is that Jaime's world, with very few exceptions. On the show, they did have some psychics and some alien stuff and so forth, but with very few instances, otherwise it was all her threats were based on science. Whereas in Diana's world, her powers come from magic. She lives in an island that is magical. She comes from a race of people that exist because of the gods, and it's not technology based; it's magic based. And so there was a fun dichotomy to play there, especially with Jaime, where she gets to realize that the world outside her, she thinks her eyes have been opened before, and now they're really, really, really open. Mm-hmm. And Diana gets to see what effect not having someone that she can trust has on her. And so they each offer each other a room to grow in the series that I think is really was an important thing for me to do.
Some of the tone of our conversation here comes from a perspective that you mentioned that you were born in 1966. I was born in 1967. So mm-hmm. Not a lot of daylight between those two dates. And I also had firsthand experience with everything on Wonder Woman on TV from the Kathy Lee Crosby TV movie onward. And we didn't have a lot of, I hate this word, geek TV at the time, but you naturally gravitated toward things like the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, just because there was something that was somewhere within that wheelhouse. For people who may not have been exposed to that stuff in the first go-round, can you provide what the basic core of the story is without spoiling too much?
The basic core of the story is that both Diana Prince, who is Wonder Woman, and Jaime Sommers, who is the Bionic Woman, both work for government agencies. And there is a threat that comes about that the government agencies are all aware is about to happen to all of them. There's a new group called Castra that is around, and they have to figure out who Castra is and what their plans are to stop them. And there's a lot of misdirection going on. Castra is really pulling the strings behind a lot of things happening all at the same time, so that they are keeping these agencies, like, they don't know what this means versus what that means, and so forth. And it turns out that the people behind Castra are a group of people who have faced Wonder Woman and the Bionic Woman in the past. And most of them have experience with robots or androids or fembots. Fembots was the Bionic Woman $6 Million Man's version of androids. So whatever the big plan is, it has something to do with the use of robots and fembots and androids and mechanical creatures who can masquerade as men or women. And then mixed into that is a Wonder Woman villain from the 1940s stories who knows where Paradise Island is, and more importantly, how to get the metal that called Feminum, that Wonder Woman's bracelets are, that's indestructible and bulletproof, and how to get that and where to get it, which is Paradise Island. So when all those villains kind of come together and hatch a big plot, the Wonder Woman and the Bionic Woman both have their hands full on multiple fronts of trying to figure out how to stop them, what the real goals are, and how it's all going to shake down.
And the artist throughout this series was Judith Tondora. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, Judith Tondora.
And you also had a host of really impressive cover artists. Can you just tell us who some of those people were?
Yeah, that was actually a lot of fun with it. Kat Staggs, who is a lesbian artist, by the way. Since you're the Comic Book Bears site, I will identify a few people's sexual preference as well. Kat Staggs was our main cover artist. And then on we had variant covers for many of the issues, including Alex Ross, Aaron Lopresti, Glenn Hansen, who's a very famous gay artist, Bill Sienkiewicz, Phil Jimenez, also a very famous gay artist, Nicola Scott, who's just recently finished up a run on Wonder Woman, and then we had various other side covers that were done for specific stores or specific conventions and so forth, including one by Dan Parent, who's the guy who created Kevin Keller, the gay Archie character on Riverdale. And so it was a lot of fun to have them involved and to work with some of them on their designs. I want to point out on the interior artist, Judith was not only, this was her first regular assignment. I mean, she had done an issue here, an issue there of things, but this was her first major big assignment. And the book was shot from her pencils. They were not
really?
inked.
Wow,
yeah.
I did not know that.
And so it made, she had to do some very tight pencils, number one, and then the colorist, Roland Pilks, they're both Hungarian, by the way, both Judith and Roland. The colorist then took them and basically kind of painted over the pencils. So it's a really painterly book in some places. But I gave her a lot to do. If you look at those pages, most comics these days will have like 3 to 5 panels to a page, and you read a page very quickly, and there's not a lot of word balloons, and you can read a whole comic in, a few minutes. Mm-hmm. And most of the pages in this book had 7 to 9 panels to a page. I grew up in the days of reading George Perez and John Byrne, and comic artists just basically, they wouldn't do a page unless it had 7 panels. And to me, storytelling is storytelling, not splash page telling.
Right.
And so I really kind of put her to the test in terms of giving her a lot of things to draw, and it was an interesting thing because I was trying to also pace it like the television show, and to kind of work in spots where you kind of go, okay, and now we're cutting to commercial, type of thing, and have the old style storytelling was always that whatever your right hand page is, it has to be a cliffhanger so that you make the reader want to turn the page. Mm-hmm. But then in the best type of storytelling, you actually, which is what they do on television, you actually switch the scene. You turn the page and you switch the scene. So you end right before a commercial, and then you come back, but you're at a different scene, and they have to go like, wait, what happened here? So they wait with anticipation, wondering what happens next. So there was a lot of that I was really trying to do to kind of make it feel like you were actually watching a television episode. So a lot of those storytelling tricks are they're tough for a regular, a seasoned comic book artist to do, but Judith, who was brand new to it, really handled it extremely well.
And something else I like that you incorporated into the single issues was a letter column.
Mm-hmm.
And rarity these days, but so happy to see that.
I was very adamant. There were certain things that I wanted when I was negotiating in the series. One was, I said, if at all possible, I want to have as many women working on it as possible. Mm-hmm. At minimum, I want to have a female artist. And then we had 3 different letterers. One of them was also a woman, and our main cover artist was a woman. I felt it was very, very important to have the female touch on the book as well. Another thing was that I wanted to have a letters column. And they were really they were like, we never get letters. And I'm like, you never get letters because you don't have letter columns. If we institute a letter column, you'll get letters. And sure enough, they got them. They weren't a lot, but there were enough letters each time that I couldn't run them all.
Right.
I was never like, oh no, I don't have any letters to run. There were always enough letters to run. And I think that's a fun thing. It's a way of the fans used to love interacting that way, and a lot of people. I have friends that's how I got involved with Titan Talk way back when, was through a letter column.
Right, and in some instances, that was our only sense of news.
Yeah.
In many instances, yeah.
Yeah, so that was something that I wanted to do, and then there's a couple of like editorial boxes where it's like, this happened in episode this, where just those editorial notes. Those were I wanted it to feel like you were reading something that could have happened in 1977. And so I brought back as many of those things as I could.
Okay, so mentioning the letter columns and the variant covers, are those all included within the trade?
Almost all of them are. Sadly, the one thing that isn't included in the trade paperback is Judith only did one cover for the series. It was a variant cover for issue 1. And for some reason, it was not included in the trade paperback, and I'm really sad about that. We actually... Her cover that was published was black and white. It was the coloring book cover, was what they called it.
Right.
But we had a color version of it that was gorgeous, and sadly, it was not published. There were a lot of things that didn't make it into the trade just because it was so full, and there wasn't a lot of space. We had a lot of sketches, we had character designs and sketches, and we had an introduction by Jeannie Epper, who was the only woman who ever played both Wonder Woman and the Bionic Woman. She was the stunt woman for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote an introduction for it. I wrote a foreword for it. There was a list of Easter eggs. All that stuff didn't get used because there just wasn't room in the trade.
I had mentioned about the terrain that existed in relation to genre TV in the 70s. And one of my favorite series of projects that you were involved in were producing some of the supplemental materials for certain DVD releases.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that that's an art that isn't as prominent nowadays. It seems companies don't have the budgets anymore. But can you just let people know about some of the DVD sets that you have, supplemental materials that you produce for? Because I have to say, specifically the Filmation stuff, very often with those sets, I would go to the bonus features first before rewatching because they were so loaded with information and so much care provided and so much research done in relation to their construction that I would have to say all of them were a joy.
Oh, good. Well, I did a book at one point in time called Animation on DVD, The Ultimate Guide, and it was this like 600-page book guide to thousands of animated DVDs, and it listed everything that was on them and short reviews of them and so forth. And BCI Eclipse contacted me afterwards and said, hey, we just picked up the license to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Would you want to come down for a meeting and consult with us on how to make this the best set for fans? And I went to that meeting and walked out of it with a contract to produce all their DVDs, all their animated DVDs. And so I spent a couple of years doing that, doing all the documentaries, the commentary tracks, the booklets, the supplemental materials, and so forth. And it was, I think, very smart of them to have hired somebody who was a fan of this type of material to begin with, because it meant that they were thinking of what's going to please the fans, not what's going to please the shareholders, not what's going to please the main audience at Best Buy or whatever else. They were saying what's going to please the fans, because they didn't know what the overall appeal of these projects. They were older. They were, what kind of appeal would they have?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know how they would sell.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first He-Man set came out. It won awards. It sold through the roof. And suddenly they knew, oh, we've got a hit on our hands. And so suddenly then I was producing all the rest of the Filmation properties. And some of those I was super excited about, like getting to do The Secrets of Isis, another, live action superheroine. That was stupendous. And She-Ra, Princess of Power. Oddly, I worked on both the original Ghostbusters live action show and the Filmation Ghostbusters cartoon show. And then years later was asked by Time Life to produce the real Ghostbusters cartoon show. And so I've produced the DVD sets for every Ghostbusters that wasn't a movie at this point.
Yeah.
And there was one cartoon I didn't do, which was Extreme Ghostbusters, but it was funny because I actually produced all the other Ghostbusters, and so it was a great time to kind of be working on that. Concurrent with that, though, was the rise of YouTube and the rise of basically companies saying, well, why do we need to put it on the DVDs when we can just do promotional videos up on YouTube?
Right.
And also the rise of Netflix. And some people don't know I actually worked at Netflix for about 4 months as a phone operator. It was during a time when I wasn't getting any writing work and I needed a job, so I got a job at Netflix as a phone operator. I remember one day I got a call from a guy and he was asking about the Ghostbusters DVD set that I had produced. And so at the end of the call, I answered all his questions. At the end of the call, I said, by the way, when you watch this, pay attention to the credits there and look at the producer's name. I said, that's the guy you happen to be talking to on the phone. So, but Netflix DVDs, for the most part, when you were getting the physical DVDs, they would send out the same physical DVDs as everyone else. But streaming was just starting to come into vogue. And when you stream stuff, they don't put any of the extras on there. And so all the companies started saying, well, why should we do this when we can either put it on YouTube or when it's not going to be on the streaming content? And that's when you started seeing all the special feature content dying off. And it's very sad now that it's not that the content's unavailable. There's any of these properties that are out there, they could do tons of material. It's just that they don't consider that it's worth it. They're like, well, the fans are going to buy it anyhow. Why should we give them extra?
Right.
And then the properties that are big enough that they can do extra, then they'll just say, okay, well, we'll do a Best Buy exclusive, and we'll do an Amazon exclusive, and we'll do this exclusive, and then 4 months from now we'll do the super special edition, and then we'll do this, and that. They're basically, instead of giving something to the fans, they're taking away from at that point because they're saying, hey, how can we milk more money out of them? At that period of time when I was working on it, it was this perfect time when they were like, what can we do to make the fans happy as opposed to what can we do to hijack the fans' wallets?
Well, if you want some testimony to how good some of these documentaries are, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, that came out in '83. At that time, I was already into punk and new wave music and had, I didn't have the first person exposure to it. So I have seen 3 or 4 He-Man episodes in my life, but I have seen all 16 parts of that documentary series. So,
oh, great.
And just tying that in, if there's a work of yours that I would recommend outside of some of the comic book work that you had mentioned earlier, your book that you had written with Lou Scheimer, the Creating the Filmation Generation, I absolutely loved every page of that. And I'm really glad that you had the opportunity to memorialize what is a very important history that shouldn't be forgotten.
Thank you. That was something where as I was working on the DVD sets with Lou, I became more and more entranced both by Lou and his stories, but also with how much of the history of television animation Lou was a part of. And even when it wasn't his own company, I mean, he was in the room when they conceived the Flintstones. It was, he was a part of or around all the things that make animation, modern television animation, a reality. All the changes, all the things that have come around. Filmation was one of the first companies to use CGI. Filmation was the last company to have all their animation done in America. They were the first company to feature a black lead character. They were the first company to put out an all-black cast with Fat Albert and the Cosby Kid. There are so many things that Filmation broke the rules on and did new things with. And so the book is really a testament to that, but it's also a a really good first-person account of what it was like as animation changed and as the rules of the game changed for animation. And Saturday morning television became a thing, and then Saturday morning television went by the wayside, and it became daytime animation. It was really one of those. I'm so glad to have gotten to do that book with Lou, because very few books about animation have gone into this much depth about the changes that were made.
Yeah, and if people believe that pitching for properties is a smooth process, all I have to do is refer to that book to how Filmation landed the Superman contract, because it's just an amazing story.
Right. See, now when you started that statement or question a few minutes ago, I thought you were probably going to talk about the Section 31 Rogue book, the Star Trek book that I did.
Oh.
That's the one I get a lot of.
Well, why don't you tell us about that then?
Well, my very first Star Trek book was a Next Generation novel called Section 31 Rogue. And it's out now on ebook. I think the book is out of print now, but the ebook is still around. But it was a story in which myself and my co-writer got to break the rules when it came to adding LGBT characters to the Star Trek canon. And the book isn't about somebody being gay, but the fact that the lead character in the book is gay is an important facet to the history of it. Because at that time there was this unofficial quietness regarding having LGBT characters. There had been a couple of minor instances in the books where, a paragraph here or a line there or something like that, but it really hadn't been addressed terribly much in the books. And then the television shows had just any references to it were miserable. They were either implying the character was villainous because they were queer, or they were implying that a character was horrible because they were queer, or they were implying that straight people were better. Being heterosexual was better than being gay. I mean, it was very mixed, wrong, bad messages in Star Trek at that point. So we got to do this book, and it was kind of an interesting behind the scenes story, because it was so groundbreaking that they didn't want the producers of the series, who had been the ones that had said no gays in Star Trek, they didn't want the producers to find out about it before it went to press. So everybody kind of conspired to keep the manuscript out of the producer's hands until the book was at the printer, and then it was like put on the bottom of the pile on their desks. So they wouldn't see it right away. And then it was at the printer, and we'd been doing all this press beforehand and had said, look, you can't run this story before this date, or else, it might not happen if you run this, and then all of a sudden the book hits. It's worldwide news that Star Trek now has gay characters and so forth. And suddenly the dam was broken, and they couldn't go back. And so I salute them now on Star Trek Discovery, in that they've had gay characters, very clearly on the show now. And I just wish that some of the reporters who talk about that would kind of get their information correct, where they were like, well, there were gay characters before, they were just done in the books. Mm-hmm. And it was done by a gay writer and his co-writer who put their nets out for this, But one of the things that makes it very popular among, besides it just being gay characters, the lead has a lover in the series. The lead actually dies in the book, which is not a spoiler because you know that from page one. But he has a lover in the series who's a big gay bear named Renaud Carew. And Renaud has appeared now in, I don't know, about 20 books or something like that. We used him again in 3 or 4 different books. And then he was a crew member on the USS Titan, which is Riker's ship. And he's been in all the Titan books, and he's been in other people's books. He's kind of become like this favorite kind of cool gay bear mascot. Mm-hmm. And therefore he's very popular among the bears because they're like, hey, not only is he a bear, but he's a gay bear. He's one of us.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so oftentimes when bear guys come up to me and goes, my favorite book of yours is, and I can almost always guess which one.
Yeah, from a mile away. Just tying that into the Wonder Woman Bionic Woman series, was it a
Mm-hmm.
fairly easy approval process with the rights holders, or was there anything that you weren't able to do that you might have wanted to sneak in there?
It was actually, I hate to say ridiculously easy, but I think it's fair to say that Warner and Universal trusted that I knew my material well enough that I wasn't messing anything up. And part of that came from them knowing that I've been writing about these characters for so long, but also because I was providing photo reference to the artist of, almost everything and every character and every, here's what Steve's office looks like from 17 different angles and, so forth. So they were able to kind of go, oh, well, it's appeared on the show. And that as far as licensors are concerned, what's on a show or on a movie is canon before anything else. Then you can say, well, if it's been in a comic or if it's been in a novel or something like that. But mostly is it on the show? Is it on the movie? Then it's okay. And with this one, because I didn't invalidate anything in continuity, they pretty much trusted me. The only weird thing that we ran into was that in the first issue both series had this thing where when they would talk to the president, there would be like a TV screen with
Mhm.
with
The presidential
the
seal.
The seal
Yeah.
of the president on it. Yeah. And it was a thing. Like every TV show at the time did that. If the president was on the air, they couldn't show who the president was, so they would just show the presidential seal with a voice coming out of the TV. And so we did that because it was like one of those, well, we have to have the president appear,
Yeah.
and it has to be the TV screen with the presidential seal on it. So we did that, and Universal came back and said, you have to change the presidential seal. It's legal for us to use that. And I was like, what are you talking about? We drew this directly from a screen capture. And they said there's now a law that you can't use the presidential seal in a for sale product without the permission of the president. And apparently sometime between 40 years ago and now, that became a law. And like not 2 days after that, I was watching Supergirl, and it was an episode with Linda Carter as the president, and they showed the presidential jet. And there's the presidential seal, but it's not quite the same president. Like little things have been tweaked on it. And so what we ended up doing is that, like, the bird in its claws, it's holding. In reality, it's holding like a bunch of arrows in one hand and some leaves in the other. Mm-hmm. And so we changed that to it's holding leaves in both hands. And I think we changed the direction of the eagle head. It's facing the other direction or something like that. We just made like little tweaks, and that was enough. It wasn't the actual presidential seal. But it was one of those things where what a weird thing to have to change, and nobody would ever think about that except for when they had to. So clearly, whoever this was at Universal had come up against this before, because they knew, hey, we can't do that.
Well, I gotta say, if that's the only thing that you got the thumbs down on, that sounds like a big win in terms of the project in general. Andy, I know that you are battling a sickness right now, feeling a bit under the weather, so I really appreciate you taking the time away from soup and rest so that you could talk to me tonight. If people wanted to reach out to you on the interwebs, where would they go?
Well, my website is andymangels.com. And my name is spelled like angels with an M, so andymangels.com. I'm also on Facebook. It's always great if people send me a message, not just a friend request, because otherwise I might ignore it and might not get to it for a year and a half. But I do try and read my messages and so forth. I am on Twitter very rarely, but mostly Facebook and my website are great ways to reach me. Okay. And I have a secondary website. I'm also part of a singing group called Broadway Bears, and so the BroadwayBears.org is the group I'm a part of, because we didn't identify that I am in fact a comic book bear.
Okay.
We've never said that.
Yeah.
I've had facial hair since I was 16, and I've never had a clean shaven face since, and never intend to.
Okay. Well, I will put a graphic on the squib for this episode to make that abundantly clear. Thank you
Okay,
so much
wonderful.
for joining me. I really, really
Hey,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Love talking to you, and I probably could go on all night, in all honesty.
I appreciate being here on the Comic Book Bears, Bill, and I wish you great luck.
And we're back for movie talk time. And I also should present a caveat. Brian is nursing a ravaged voice, and it's sexy as hell. So we hope you enjoy Brian not sounding like Brian. So,
Hello, how are you?
yeah.
Uncanny goodness.
I want to thank. Let me take. Well, yeah, we'll get into that a little later. But again, as I mentioned in the intro, that we are in a superhero movie season, it seems. And recently we had the release of Thor Ragnarok, which took place on what was the exact date? November 3rd. God, it feels like 5 months ago already.
Yeah.
It's so strange.
When did November become a focus month for superhero releases? I mean, last year this time we had Doctor Strange, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That was in November, and it's been the past several years that we've had a Marvel movie or some related film that's been coming out around November. And is it trying to capture sort of the Thanksgiving?
I think so, because it makes a lot of sense given that that's a time period where college students don't have to worry, at least for a week and a half, about studies, and can actually go home and see movies. I mean, it goes up and down, but sometimes Thanksgiving weekend can be pretty potent in terms of box office. So I don't know the exact rationale for that, but
another theory that I didn't even know about until I started going to the bars Thanksgiving night, because I was like, who goes to the bars out on Thanksgiving night? Everybody goes out to the bar on Thanksgiving night because they're visiting from out of town or they're back home and they don't want to be at home all day and all night. So going out to a movie, doing other, it makes sense. It does make sense for a lot of people.
Okay. Well, and I know, for my tradition, usually we go out and do, Black Friday shopping, or avoid, very, very obviously avoid the Black Friday shopping by going to the movies instead. Mm-hmm. And though usually it's massively crowded, so clearly something's working. But the interesting thing with both of these films, Thor Ragnarok especially, is that it was premiering so early in the month, so about 3 weeks away from Thanksgiving. But it's still going strong. It's still doing pretty well. And I'm sure that this weekend it's going to still rake in more dollars here in the U.S.
Okay, so Steve, since you have the mic, do you want to present the basic plot of Thor Ragnarok, or do you want me to take over in that capacity and read directly from the Wikipedia entry?
Well, I'll do just a quick summary. So basically, Thor and Loki encounters the previously heretofore unknown sister of Hela. And she basically comes in to destroy Asgard. And in the meantime, Thor and Loki are essentially banished to the other side of the universe, where Thor discovers one of his oldest buddies from Earth, the Hulk. And somehow they have to escape from the other end of the universe and the Grandmaster's champion game and save Asgard from Hela. Kind of what it is. I mean, there's very little plot, but a lot that happens around it.
Okay. Well, Steve, I let you present the basic storyline. Let me throw it over to Brian first for our first opinion on the movie, since Brian has a cat named Odin, and there's a lot of connections there. So, Brian, why don't you tell us what you thought of Thor Ragnarok?
Well, Odin loved it. It was Take Your Cat Day at the movies, and obviously I had to do it. It's a good movie. It's a really good movie. I'm trying to think back because it's been a while and I've had other things that have happened in my head since, but I really don't think I had too much to complain. I will say that I raved about certain things like the soundtrack by Mark Mothersbaugh, because just fits the tone of the movie wonderfully, perfectly. Like just the combination of epic, sort of Lord of the Rings-ish, whatever music, but also the synthy, fun, nostalgic, if you will, of a bygone era, combined with this space, quote unquote, sound that he has back from when he was in Devo and has certainly done many times since. Like, it was just perfect. The director, whose name I butcher every time I try to say it, but Waititi.
Mm-hmm.
What's his first name? How do you say it?
Taika,
yeah.
Taika. Okay, I always butcher that. He's great, and I really, really need to go watch The Things We Do in Shadows because I have not, and that is totally to my detriment because everybody's told me I'm going to love it, and I'm sure I will. But his sensibility and even his vocal stylings, and I got this so wrong on the Flame On podcast when we talked about this whenever it came out. I was thinking it was Rhys Darby, another Flight of the Conchords alum, who has a very similar New Zealand accent as Taika Waititi. But the voice of Korg, that great performance, even if it was sort of CG and kind of silly. Like, it set the right tone in those alien vistas and in that semi-serious Jeff Goldblum scene-chewing bro sort of comedy with Hulk and Thor. Like, all of that is just gold to me, and just my favorite part. If I had to pick one or two things that annoy me, I think the summarily dismissing of Odin is a little disappointing, and some of those shots looked really badly composited in terms of green screens. The other thing I would just put out is Hela's great. I love the performance. I love the headdress, and I love the way they visualized it all. But at the very beginning of that, to again kind of summarily dismiss from their mortal coil the Warriors 3, at least the first two, and then try to give the third a little bit more screen time, I was a little bummed about that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's Thor, and God's going to be reborn, and lots of things can happen. So I mean, it is fine as Ragnarok. And just again, it was delightful. This tone was so perfect in its sort of serious but joke but serious. Like, it's perfect for that. That franchise needed something else besides just doing another ponderous Thor story. So I was very happy.
Okay, cool. Steve?
No, I agree. It was definitely a breath of fresh air for the Thor franchise, because the Thor movies, the previous two, have usually end up at the bottom of the pile when people talk about ranking the Marvel movies in terms of quality and interest. And this one, I think, just kind of rocketed Thor back up towards the top. I definitely thought it was one of the funniest movies, one of the funniest Marvel films. It ranks up there with Guardians of the Galaxy and unexpected guffaws, and the fact that I probably spent more than half this movie chuckling, on purpose, not at like any particular faults or problems that it was having, but because it was genuinely funny. And I really definitely credit Taika Waititi for a lot of that, because his sense of humor is definitely great. What We Do in the Shadows is one of my favorite movies from a couple of years ago. I think he definitely brought a great breath of fresh air to not just the Thor franchise, but also the Marvel Universe altogether, with his take. And I hesitate to compare it to something that never was, but I kind of have a feeling that if Marvel allowed Edgar Wright more of a free reign on Ant-Man, that we would have that kind of unique, shining humorous example, for that first film that we definitely have here for Taika's, first foray into the Marvel Universe. And I think they gave him a lot more freedom, let his voice shine through a lot. And of course, his voice literally shining through as Korg, which, was one of the best characters, most understated characters in this whole movie. I agree. The music was great. In this post Stranger Things era, it definitely brought that sort of 80s, late 70s feel to this film. I got lots of Tron feelings from it. Just in the type of neon, the colorful, bursts of light here and there, and of course the sound was just very, I don't know, it's definitely that synth just really was wonderful for this. Plot wise, there wasn't a lot that really needed to make sense in it. It was a fun collection of set pieces. Cate Blanchett chewing up scenery as she was chewing up bodies. With her completely unexplained powers of throwing sharp things, and having that awesome headdress. I mean, that was like the highlight of camp. And of course, Thor and Loki were great together. Those two actors, Hiddleston and Hemsworth, are just great together at all times. Valkyrie, Tessa, what's her name?
Tessa Thompson.
Tessa Thompson was fantastic. I loved her surliness, and just she definitely brought a good counterbalance to the massive sausage fest that this film was, because really it was just all men, Hela and Valkyrie, I think that was a great counterbalance, and of course gotta love my Hulk. I love Hulk. I love that we saw his ass in this one. I love the fact that they highlighted the fact that he was a pretty furry dude. And it just gave him more screen time than he's had up to this point in the other ensemble films. And I loved it. I thought it was a ton of fun. Is it a great film? Is the writing amazing? No, but it doesn't have to be. It's a fun, goofy, cosmic, which again, another great decision, letting it go cosmic instead of being sort of like a weird fantasy costume drama. It was just great. A lot of fun.
Okay. My first disagreement with you, I did not connect with Tessa Thompson at all. I thought she was lousy, honestly. I can think of 15 actresses off the top of my head that could have done the same job, if not better. I didn't see any appeal there. I didn't see any chemistry with the other actors. She didn't work for me. That being said, the rest of the film did. I think this shows the benefit of sometimes being loose with the script, because by a lot of reports, there was a lot of ad-libbing, which is not an easy thing to coordinate with big budget films. I mean, I'm sure that the Hulk CGI was set in stone, but there are a lot of reports that he would let the actors just roam free. I mean, I'm certain a lot of the back and forth between Ruffalo and Hemsworth was based in that. I think this movie really showed what a treasure Hemsworth is in this part. I think this was the best use of him as Thor so far, maybe because it was the most relaxed. I agree with you, Brian, that it was a little strange to see the Warriors 3 effectively dismissed so quickly and without it having any reverberations on a personal sense. That was a little strange. I liked how it was like 70s rock. It was like bloated, and ridiculous and a lot of fun at the same time, even though, musically, as you said, it's connected a little later in time, in the sense that I think Tron was a very good comparison there, that it is kind of like rooted in that time with what Mother's Ball gave. I liked it a lot. It was a lot of ridiculous fun, and this movie was an example of how you can make a comic book based movie comic booky without that being a negative. It was, ridiculous fun. And that's Thor Ragnarok. Anybody else have anything to add there?
I did want to add, there was one character that I was highly disappointed in. And that was the character of Scourge. Completely unnecessary, and just a really... It was just a sad misuse of Karl Urban. I love Karl Urban in everything that he does. He will be my Judge Dredd forever, even if millions of other people end up playing him. But he seemed like a completely superfluous character that made a bizarre personal transition. His story arc made no sense, or ultimately had no importance. I don't know. I was kind of disappointed in that. But other than that, all the characters, Jeff Goldblum. If Jeff Goldblum were, an immortal weirdo, he would be Jeff Goldblum. Like, it just Jeff Goldblum is an immortal weirdo, so having him be one, in a cosmic sense, is pretty well expected. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it is, he was just playing from experience there.
Yeah, and that post-credit sequence with him was a treasure.
Oh yeah. let's just call the draw. Let's just we both get a win.
You don't have a revolution without somebody to have a revolution again, so.
Oh, thank you. No, so you're welcome. It's just great.
I like the DJ scene of his. That was to me the most Goldbloomy of Goldblum scenes, other than the end credit one, of course. What did you guys think of the mid credits? Presumably Thanos. I think they've confirmed it's Thanos' ship. Are they all just royally fucked? Because seriously, like that, after all they went through to get the Asgardians off world, I mean, at this point, I don't see a bright future. And from what little people have leaked about Infinity War, Thor doesn't start out in a good place.
No, and it could be that was an anchor for him to go after it, save the rest of the people from the ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's why he ends up in that situation which has been talked about in the Infinity War trailer.
Yeah. So I just it was kind of a downer in a mid credits thing after such a harrowing finish to sort of have that fit in there. But then again, the palate cleanser of that last scene with Goldblum did kind of set the thing. The other thing, so back to Karl Urban, I have to weigh in here because I love Karl Urban as well. Mm-hmm. I did think the character was kind of odd. Pat leaned over to me at one point and was like, is that Terrax? Because he's got like an axe and he kind of fits like maybe you could see how they could go with that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, I don't think so, because this doesn't seem like why would you do that other than a very, very, very subtle Easter egg, nod to the fans. But I just love Karl Urban so much, and it reminded me of, and I know a lot of people hate this movie, but Chronicles of Riddick, when he played the whatever character that was. I mean, he doesn't look the same at all, but in that he's kind of a space warrior, badass, whatever. I went with it, and it made no damn sense, but it was fine. Like I just, and the fact that the character redeemed himself in some ways, at least they allowed that. But I really don't know why you do that other than as a plot contrivance, like as a way to explain and have Hela be sassy to somebody. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they it was clear that they just needed something to have her be campy against, and so they picked Karl Urban to be a straight man. I mean, he starts off really goofy, and then he stops being goofy. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he's heroic. Like it just as a character, it seemed like if there was any point where the production executives wanted to make their needs and their checklist felt, that was the character to do it with.
The most unexpected character for me was Topaz as the Guardian's bodyguard. Do you guys have any familiarity with that character?
No, I don't think so.
She's from the Ultraverse.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, Marvel actually used an Ultraverse character.
Well, I mean, I love the actress. Mm-hmm. She's
from what I understand, she's in a lot of his films.
She's a New Zealand comedian. She's been in a couple sketch comedy shows in Australia and in New Zealand.
Yeah, she was part of the Ultraforce. Queen Topaz. Yeah, very different take on the character. But
no, don't give me the melty stick. I don't want the melty stick.
I know my other half's favorite scene was the birthday ship.
Yes.
The orgy ship.
We're talking about this film, and it's almost organically going into comparisons, and I want to avoid that as much as possible because they work on such different levels that it's a little bit more unfair to one than the other, but it's unfair to both. So with that awkward transition, I'll start with the Justice League talk. Now, I have to provide a caveat regarding Justice League. And I'm going to bore people who've heard this before, but it's a charming story about me, so I'm going to keep it in. I'm old enough to have watched the premiere of Super Friends, changed my life. So I can say with some degree of certainty that there is a side of me that has been waiting 43 years, 2 months, and 9 days for the Justice League film. Did I get the Justice League film I expected? No, but I got a Justice League film. Are either of you comfortable with providing a plot? Because I think I can. Sometimes it's
Bill, go ahead and do it. Well, it's really not too. Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we start in the post Batman v Superman world, and with the absence of Superman, the world is in a more racist, it's in a precarious spot. There's a mood pervading throughout the world. And one of the things that the death of Superman has done is it has triggered these mother boxes to start activating. Tying into the presence of 3 mother boxes on Earth, we are informed from Diana early on that thousands of years ago, Steppenwolf and his group of parademons attempted to conquer Earth, and it was the combined efforts of the Olympian gods and the Atlanteans and the Amazons, and spoilers, the Green Lanterns, to repel Steppenwolf's army. And that defeat led to the protection of the 3 mother boxes. With these mother boxes being reactivated, Steppenwolf comes back to Earth and manages to retrieve the first mother box from Themyscira, hence an appearance from the Amazons. And throughout this, Bruce, and this was something I thought was really interesting, apart from Aquaman, you almost never hear the character names. They basically refer to everybody in the first person, which was a device that I really loved. So Bruce Wayne and Diana Prince are in the process of forming a team to battle this invading army, which they have discovered is happening. Throughout the action, they discover that the mother box can potentially revive Superman from his death or dormant state. They do that. It doesn't go exactly as according to plan, but eventually Superman comes to his senses thanks to Lois Lane and Mama Kent. And we have a team that is constructed of Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Aquaman, Flash, and Cyborg. And they defeat Steppenwolf, and at the end of the film, they are obviously making preparations for this combination of people to stay together and be the Justice League going forward. Anything I missed?
Well, you
got it.
You forgot the other member of the Justice League, Alfred, because he had just as much input as quite a few of the rest of them did.
Okay. All right. Well, Steve, what did you think of the film? Because you actually saw this earlier than most people.
I did with friend of the show, Chris Cummins. I was in Delaware and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania last week, and so I ended up luckily having some time to meet up with Chris, and he was kind enough to extend his press pass for the early preview the Monday before it was released, and so I did get to see it, and I also didn't have to wait in line with all the rest of the plebs, waiting for their free seats. So yay, reserved seating. I really enjoyed this movie. But would I say, and I'm going to say this now, would I say that this is a great film? No. I was so excited to see this movie, and I kept that excitement through the film, and I definitely do want to watch it again. I've only seen it once, and I do want to see it a second time. Bill, I think at this point you've seen it like 3 times.
Twice. I'm planning to see it a third time, but I've seen it twice, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I definitely want to see it again so I can catch some of the things that I may have missed the first time around. But I was so looking forward to seeing a film where all these characters that I love from the comics would get to interact with each other and fight against some big world-ending evil like they usually do in the comics, and just get to really highlight who they are and how they interact together. And I did get that, but I have to say my favorite parts of the film were where they weren't fighting, were where they were actually having conversations and talking about each other and talking to each other. And, Bill, you said it right there. They don't really use code names as much in this film. They call each other by their first names, and it breeds a kind of familiarity that, always comforts me or makes me happy when I hear that in the Marvel films. When they don't just refer to each other as these, code words, they actually talk to each other as if they are other people, which brings a bit of humanity to, these godlike superhero characters that sometimes are written very cardboardy and two-dimensional when they're just embodying their superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
So I really loved the scenes where they're just sitting around and chewing the fat and talking about stuff and, letting their quirks come out. There was a great scene where, they're sitting around and Aquaman's just talking about, he's just, being all macho like he usually is and talking about, how he's not afraid of anything and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden starts talking about all this, really personal, really, whatever stuff. And you look down and you see that, Wonder Woman's had the lasso around him this whole time while he's been talking. And he's like, but it's just that, the characters getting to be themselves was my favorite part about this. As well as the resurrection of Superman, I thought it was a very convoluted way to get to it. But once it happened, once he was brought back, that was probably my favorite fight scene in this whole film, where it was the League against Superman. And just the way that it was filmed, the way that it was, edited and put together, and also because it had one of my new favorite characters, Ezra Miller's Flash, as one of the main, the sort of like the main highlights of it. I think that they do best when it's just them. When you bring Steppenwolf into this, and Steppenwolf, I have to say, it joins a long line of shitty supervillains, and I don't know why people keep doing this. But, when I compare, and I'm going to compare it right now, Hela in Thor Ragnarok, which ostensibly is a relatively two-dimensional character. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's got some kind of motivation, but she lives it up, and she's campy. And yes, there's a lot of CGI there, but it's not the whole thing. Versus Steppenwolf, who amazing, Shakespearean actor Kieran Hines ruined here because it's not his face. It's just a CGI version of his face. Mm-hmm. Everything about him is CGI. He gets to have like a few spouty, I'm a super villain, bringing back unity and bringing the apocalyptic world here. I had no concerns about him. He had no gravitas to him. Was mm-hmm. just a CGI joke, and that I think for me brought this film down. If they had put a person in that villain mm-hmm. instead of just sort of a CGI mishmash of he's a bad guy. I think this film would have really elevated itself, and I kind of decry that decision completely. But everything else about this film, I loved. I loved a lot of the action. I loved the characters together. I love that even though they kind of pushed them together pretty quickly, you still got a lot of personal moments mm-hmm. with these characters. You could hear their motivations. You could see a lot of their personalities come through, and it made me excited to see the individual films. I mm-hmm. want to see Aquaman. I want to see The Flash now, and I wasn't even sure about Ezra Miller's Flash. I mm-hmm. was totally in the other camp, like, I don't know, Ezra Miller. I don't think he can do it. I thought he was brilliant.
I have a friend who cannot get around the costume.
The costume was kind of clunky, but
I thought they made a perfect rationale for why the costume is what it is.
That's the exact same thing that I thought about Cyborg too. Yeah. Cyborg's CGI was god awful, especially around whenever he tried to move his head. It just, it looked like the animators were having an off day. Yeah. But the way that he appeared made perfect sense, and in the right before the credits roll, you see him change to a version of him that most people recognize, because he's changing, he's evolving as a character, evolving in his powers, and it makes sense that you would see that transition. So I expect the same thing would happen in the Flash as well, that he's that weird clunky origami outfit, armor that he has mm-hmm. will probably be streamlined going forward. But I'm just so excited to see these characters in their own films. I loved how it was Wonder Woman and Batman who really were the heart of this attempt to build a team together, and then they worked because they realized that they couldn't be the soul of the team. Mm-hmm. They brought Superman back, and they explained it so well. Like, I think that is what makes the Justice League and what makes the Super Friends such a powerful team and a mm-hmm. concept that the Avengers never could be. Mm-hmm. Is that these are people who are great friends, and that these are people who have a history and an understanding of each other that isn't always there in other franchises or other character groups. But I think in this film they had some missed opportunities. That the villain, of course, being the big one, that could have made this film much better. And if the final after credits scene is any indication, I think they will be going in the right direction, because the cheers in the theater afterwards, by when that final after credits scene was revealed and the characters were there, the character who got off the boat, I should say.
Yeah.
Just everybody in the theater was like, "Oh my god!" and woo! And, it was just such a great reaction, and that's the direction I want to see, bringing that kind of excitement to developments into the future for this.
You want to see the villains have a all women's baseball team?
Yes.
Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Is that
exactly.
the direction you're hoping they'll go?
I am hoping that they make a league of their own. And hey, they could bring in Rosie and Madonna for it. I'm sure they would totally dig it. But, oh man, that would be a great in-joke, wouldn't it? That would be so cool if, like, Madonna and Rosie showed up and Gina Davis, like, showed up in like, a random scene from a future film. That'd be so cool. But anyway, it wasn't so much what he said, but the character that he said it to.
Okay.
And I don't know if we want to spoil that, but...
Right. Okay. Let's not.
We spoiled everything else. But...
Sure. I'm going to throw this over to Brian, because Brian posted a picture of himself before he saw the film, and he looked particularly pained. Now that we
I
hear
thought that was sexy face. That wasn't sexy face.
No, that was not sexy
I do
face.
this wrong.
It kind of was verging on I'm pissed off face, like, why the hell am I putting myself through this?
Honestly, that was really what I was going for. I wasn't pained, but I was really like, oh God, what are we about to go through?
So what did you go through there, Brian?
I'll say that I also have watched the Justice League, Super Friends, and admittedly have a long and, somewhat comfortable. I love the Justice League concept. I love the history. I love many of the incarnations that have been throughout the years. What I think bothers me the most about this film is that for something so important and large, and we've talked about this on this show, how, like, this is huge. To have Superman and Batman meet was just unprecedented in the movies, even though they've been characters, like, longer than most DC or Marvel characters. And then to have that be such an abysmal disaster, you would hope and expect that then they would do the follow-up and do even more high stakes. I mean, to have all of these other iconic characters, again, who have not been in films before: Cyborg, Flash, Aquaman, Steppenwolf, whatever. Like, you'd think that they would go all out to make sure that this was a guaranteed fucking mega billion-dollar blockbuster, whatever. And admittedly, we know there are production issues and there's drama and really sad, messed up things that happened during this production. But even Joss Whedon coming in at the end can't right this ship. And what they made, albeit so much better than anything other than maybe Wonder Woman that's come before in recent memory from the DC cinematic universe. But, like, it was a total disappointment. But again, disappointment if you expected much, and I didn't. So actually, I left feeling like, okay, well, they got Superman right finally, and I love Aquaman because he's total brave and the bold, bluster as a sort of seafaring hipster, which I'm totally cool with that. I mean, really, his village was more seafaring Icelandic hipsters, but whatever. Yeah. But, like, I'm totally down with 90% of what they did in terms of that. But the Steppenwolf stuff and some of the Steppenwolf stuff, the bizarre flashback to the Lord of the Rings that they injected into this film, the bastardization of what they've done with Kirby. And I will not claim original credit for this, but I was on iFanboy recently, and they were reviewing Thor a while ago, but also Justice League. And you have two movies that we're talking about, both which come very, very heavily from the mind of Jack Kirby. Thor was a loving tribute to all of the Kirby visual awesomeness that he did in the cosmic realm and in Thor. And what we have in Justice League is taking one or maybe I guess 2 characters from Kirby, and the idea of a boom tube and a mother box, and just totally shitting all over it. And I mean that very literally, because it was like they took these bright, beautiful Kirby designs and literally put dark, muted shit on them.
What are the Kirby dominated elements apart from Steppenwolf and the mother box and the boom tube? I'm missing something.
No, that's it. That's
yeah,
Kirby.
because it's an element of Kirby, but I would never call Justice League Kirby-esque in any incarnation. So that's where I got a little bit confused.
Justice League is not. No, you're right. You're absolutely right to point that out. But what I'm saying is to take the New Gods, which, we've talked about this. They are one of my favorite Kirbyisms ever. And a lot of people love the New Gods as it's like peak Kirby. Because a lot of the stuff he did after the New Gods, and even to some extent some of the New Gods stuff, it kind of went downhill. And he was never the height that he had, before that. So to take the peak Kirby designs and story and everything, and again, I'm saying shit not to be like, I mean, it's a little bit of, whatever, but to mute the designs, the visual feel, and to even sort of take this Zack Snyder-y approach and take that on and do that on Kirby and the rest of the Justice League too. But I'm more mad about the Kirby stuff because the Justice League was Zack Snyder's Justice League with Joss Whedon pumping in some good feel-good moments, and admittedly, it was good. The Whedon stuff was really good. I honestly saw clearly, moment to moment, oh, this is that film. Oh, this is this film. And it was sort of weird, and it felt weird to have it all as this gestalt. When I left the film, again, I didn't feel like it was the worst thing ever. Way, way, way better than everything else except Wonder Woman. But I'm still really disappointed that that's what we got for this epic moment in history where we finally see the Justice League brought to the film. Just so many missed opportunities and missteps and messes that it's just, I think we've talked about it. They just need to kind of start all over, or at least maybe do what it sounds like they're going to do, which is saying, you know what, let's just let characters go do their thing. We'll let filmmakers besides Zack Snyder come in and do their thing and make this interesting. And, it wouldn't shock me if they do a sequel down the road and it's somebody else, maybe even Joss Whedon, and they pick up these pieces and do the dark side story that we really should get. And I feel like, and that's a great opportunity to roll back. I'm not saying make it a comedy, but roll back some of the dark hues, the visual design, the modern DC 52 influence, and really just bring out what I think is beautiful about the New Gods. And even in Darkseid, you can have some visual color and design that can come out. And I don't know. That's I think if I had to think back, and I've been thinking about it a lot of stuff I loved, and Steve touched on a lot of that. The soundtrack with Danny Elfman, obviously thrilled, so thrilled, beyond over the moon.
See, I thought that was, well, I'll talk about it when I get my mic, but I thought that was meaningless.
Oh, well, I mean, because
I did not pick up on any musical cues apart from the Batman theme from '89, the Wonder Woman drummy thing, and that little bit of the Superman theme from John Williams. If you played any of that music, I could not tell you if it was from Justice League or not.
Oh, no. Oh, you're right. No, you're totally right. Elfman modern, and this is true for years now, he doesn't do what he used to do. But even getting that little bits of it throughout, it just was such an emotional touchstone for me that it made, I think, some of that go down smoother, if you will. Yeah. Because there were certainly some fun things about the way he did Batman. I mean, at the end of the day, I would be okay with this style for a Batman film. And again, I feel like they righted the Superman ship, whereas now, we've seen what Henry Cavill is as a good Superman. Like he is Superman. But I don't want any more of this muted, whatever, just generic video game feel that I felt like Wonder Woman got dragged down by a little bit, and really are the worst parts of this film.
Okay. Well, I think this film had a bit of a damned if they did, damned if they didn't tag associated to it, because part of the film had to be an apology for elements of BVS and Man of Steel.
Yeah.
Which I don't think of many films that are saddled with that, where they're saddled with what came before being such a pro-negative. And I think some of the box office and some of the critical reactions were tied to that. I don't think you can dispute that. As I said, my perception of this film is colored. I've waited for this a long time. I'm happy to get it in any form. I will agree with you guys. Steppenwolf was, which is also really frustrating because the Steppenwolf character is actually fairly interesting in the comics. He's Darkseid's uncle, yet he's an underling of Darkseid because of the political machinations. And instead we got, effectively another poo monster. You throw in the CGI comparison to what preceded it. Even the storyline, I didn't think about Steppenwolf having had a presence on Earth and then coming back. I didn't think that was such a bad conceit. It was just the execution of that was a bit clunky. Again, this is another damned if they do situation, because if it had been Darkseid, they're just copying Thanos for the uninformed. So I don't think DC at this point can ever really use Darkseid to the full potential, unless Brian, as you mentioned, possibly incorporating it in a New Gods format instead of as an adversary for other heroes. I enjoyed Ezra Miller as Flash much more than I thought I would, given what we had seen in the brief bits in BVS and in some of the trailers that preceded the film. I came to really enjoy him in the film as it went on. Yeah, Cyborg is kind of just there. But, law of averages, if you have 5 or 6 that they're doing the job from a storytelling standpoint, I'm okay. I thought, as you guys just said, we got Superman this time around. I wish we had seen the Superman, and not just the Superman, I wish we had seen this Lois and this Martha Kent before, too. Because they're not in the film a lot, but the bits that they are important touchstones. I dig Bro Aquaman, and I liked how to me, that was the most interesting backstory in the film, because they gave you just enough of his history to make it interesting. With the scene with Mira, Amber Heard, geez, that's Mira.
Oh yeah.
She looks exactly what I thought Mira would look like.
They didn't have to play with her costume like they usually do with a lot of these superhero films, where they're like, oh, the costume's a little too on the nose. I was sad, speaking of that, with his backstory, they did cut a scene out with Willem Dafoe's Vulko. That apparently would have been interesting to see.
And they also cut out a scene with the Iris West that was cast. So, maybe in the bonus materials. I thought it was a very streamlined film. It's still a bit awkward, but I think that just comes with the troubled production history of it. I think it's commendable that it wasn't the mess it maybe could have been, given you basically had 2 different directors, no matter what the credits say. I also like Jeremy Irons as Oracle. Think that works for the team. And, he's a very quiet scene stealer. And I enjoyed him a lot. One of my favorite moments was the first post-credit scene with the Flash and Superman having a race.
I love that too, Bill. I really do.
Oh, yeah. That's the time where you just sit back, and to me that was like when the 2 teams of Avengers went against each other at Civil War. You're like, wow, superheroes.
Yeah. Well, that's why my favorite scene, hands down, among all of them. The talking, like the conversations and the slow moments, I loved. But the scene that really got me, and the best fight scene in the entire film, is after Superman is revived, and he's confused, doesn't really understand what's going on, and he attacks the other League members. Just that scene where it's like, this is the Justice League going up against their strongest friend. This is the soul of the team, and the rest of them are getting their asses just creamed. But that part where Flash is running around Superman, and everything else is moving in slow motion, but Superman turns his eye first, and then his head to face Flash, while everybody else is basically in freeze frame. And the Flash's reaction, Ezra Miller had that wide eye, like, holy shit, that everybody else in the theater I know was thinking. That scene was amazing. That was the feel of a fight scene that Justice League can give. And unfortunately, with such a shitty villain, we were kind of robbed of that in the rest of the film. If what I kind of wish they had, and no disrespect to Kirby's Steppenwolf, I kind of wish that they had the New 52 Steppenwolf.
I did too. I thought the Earth 2 Steppenwolf was just right on the money as a conqueror. That he had charisma enough to appeal to people that he didn't have to conquer, where they fell in line because of it. I totally agree with you with that. And
I mean,
there's a lot of actors that could have done that. There's a lot of actors that they could have had in that role as they had provided. I will totally agree with you. It was in some ways a blown opportunity.
Hell, they could have had some WWE guys that are wanting their turn on the big screen as a heel. Like Sheamus would have been an awesome Steppenwolf, New 52, Earth 2 Steppenwolf, because you have to be able, like in that version of Steppenwolf, you kind of have to realize not only was he a conqueror, like you said, people fall in line because of his strength and they're just, they feel the power that he has, but it's also a character that somehow Wonder Woman in Earth 2 and New 52 Earth 2 had a child. So you have to kind of, like, it was a character with more depth, whereas this Steppenwolf was like for Apocalypse and blah blah blah. And he actually does throw out Darkseid once. I did hear it. He does say the word for Darkseid, and
he does say new gods once.
Yeah, and the new he's like, I will take my place among the new gods or whatever. And it's just like, where's the personality? There's none. He's just a CGI character with a wasted actor in Kieran Hines, because Kieran Hines is fantastic, but they gave him putty face with two weird mandibular extrusions, which I don't really understand.
I did hit my other half the first time I saw the Green Lanterns in the flashback scene. I was very happy to see that, and very happy how they integrated it in there. Where you had heard all these rumors that the very last scene is a Green Lantern coming to Earth or something. Who knows? They shot so much of this film. Who knows? There probably is footage of that.
There's a whole other movie out there.
I mean, for God's sake, there's a lot of trailer footage that wasn't in the film. I really hope this film has a much more optimistic financial life compared to what they're predicting at this point. And again, we're touching on stuff that we said at the beginning of the show about these movies that all of a sudden are being released in November, that they are going to have students home and that will pick up box office and things like that. Word of mouth is relatively good. All I can say is if it was my Facebook feed regarding the number of people who went to see it, it would be a $400 million opening instead of a $96 million opening, because it seemed everybody went at least once. As you had mentioned, Steve, I have seen this film twice. I saw it in 2D and then managed to go to, I'm just being coy about this, go to a subsequent IMAX screening. The second time I saw the film, it moved much quicker than the first. Naturally, that's going to happen if you have familiarity with it, but I would be interested to see how you guys felt about seeing the film a second time, because it was more concentrated as a cinematic experience the second time. The first time was more weighted with seeing if expectations were realized or not. And
I can feel that. I can see that being very true.
So I do think some of my enthusiasm is because I had seen it back to back and had the better cinematic experience. And again, with IMAX, the IMAX is not in 3D, and it wasn't radically different. So I would be very interested to hear from people after they had seen it a second time.
No, I was going to say I will see it a second time because I have not bought Man of Steel or Batman vs. Superman or Justice League, obviously, on any media, Blu-ray, whatever. I will buy this movie. And that is a big thing to me, because there are Marvel movies that I thought were okay in the theater that I would not buy. But I will buy this just because, as much as I've had issues with it, it is still important, and it does get at least the character I care about the most, Superman, better than anything they've done since the Christopher Reeve movies. So I will see it again, and hopefully I'll have a slightly better experience that time.
And I will also have to say, tying into that, as some time goes by, people realize this did hit the marks as a popcorn film. My favorite line in the film is "and room for more." I did my little happy clappy thing, like a dope.
Was that Wayne Manor? Because it sort of looked like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, that's because it was all run down in the last movie. And I what's really interesting, I was kind of thinking if there was some kind of continuity between the Nolan Batman movies and that, where in the Nolan Batman movies, Wayne Manor was destroyed as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like, nothing else really carried over from that, from that trilogy, but the fact that Wayne Manor is abandoned and had been destroyed at some point, or, mostly, hit at some point. But it's nice that they are building a Hall of Justice in, Wayne Manor. I think that's kind of cool.
Was it the Justice League film I wanted? No way. There would be the satellite. There would be the atom on someone's friggin' shoulder. That's my Justice League. But was I happy with the film in the end? Yes. So that's where we are.
Well, that's the thing. We can only go up from here. They can only get bigger and, fix some of the issues that people have had about this. I kind of hate to say it, but I think Zack Snyder, well, I don't hate to say it, a lot of people support this kind of idea, but there are people who like Zack Snyder. I think that maybe he should move his vision aside. He could take his executive producer position, but I don't think that under his guidance we really need to go down that path anymore, especially with the new Superman, especially with the Superman that's come out of this film.
He may be the right creative vision for a singular film. I don't think he's the right creative force to propel an entire franchise.
Yeah.
And my feeling is, if you had cut the last 20 minutes out as Man of Steel, I think it would be much more fondly remembered.
There were a lot of good moments, so you're right, but it just taints the whole thing.
Yeah.
You think back, and all you can remember is that awful last third act. It's,
It was unnecessary. It was disaster porn, and we didn't need it. But interesting with Justice League, maybe we could have used a little bit of that, because it didn't feel like the threat was as global as the implication was.
Yeah, Steppenwolf with no stakes. Like, he's going to bring about the end of the planet, I guess.
And you could have had something like a Mordecacus, or like Final Crisis with the technology virus. There were things you could have done where you could have provided the global threat without the repeated threat to massive population extinction.
Yeah.
I almost.
This one we had no population extinction. There was like one Russian family, and I didn't feel too scared for them.
Yeah. That was also a wonderful Superman moment where he broke the action to save a family.
Oh yeah.
There's civilians. There
was leadership. There was guidance. There were people working together. It was like, yes.
So, I'm hoping that in the end, this is going to be more fondly looked at than some of the press that we've seen over the last few days. Okay, so there we go. We had Thor Ragnarok and we had Justice League, and that moves us to the final segment of our show, which is the Woofs of the Week segment, where we spotlight something, which may be a comic book, maybe a film. I don't know why we would want to talk about either after all this, or a TV show, or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, may enjoy sampling. So let's go to Steve first. Steve, what is your Woof of the Week?
Well, it's about a comic book that's also a TV series.
Okay.
And it's a bizarre one that I don't think most people have read, but they should. It's called The End of the Fucking World by Charles Foreman. It was a graphic novel, relatively short graphic novel that he created, I would say back in 2013 was when it was first published. But it's a small format book put out by Fantagraphics about two teenagers, James and Alyssa, who run away from home and just have their, I guess, their Catcher in the Rye sort of teenage rebellion phase by committing, certain acts of violence and theft. And it really just kind of shows two characters, one who is descending into sociopathy, and the other one that is just a little lost, but wants to stick by her friend. It's a very bleak book. Touches on a lot of themes like mental illness and abandonment. But
sorry about that.
Oh no problem. But they actually made it into a TV series, and apparently it was co-produced by Netflix. It's been released in the UK. where it's a live action series, about 8 episodes, and it really does capture the bizarre sort of hopelessness and uncertainty of youth mixed with violence and bloody fantasies, but in the UK, which is a very odd setting for this. It's like an American story, but then played out in the UK. It's very odd mishmash, but it works. So I recommend The End of the Fucking World, the book by Charles Forsman, or the TV series, which should be airing on Netflix probably the start of next year. It's already aired in the UK.
And sometimes the geographical switch can work. I think a High Fidelity was.
Yeah.
Sometimes that stuff can work. And I'm really glad you brought that up because, when you do think of comic book based film or TV properties, you always go to superheroes. And that was one I'm really glad you brought that up because another one that I think you might not get the exposure from comic-based media like this is My Friend Dahmer.
Oh my God, I so want to see that movie.
Yeah.
I so want to see it. It came out the same day that the Justice League did, I think.
Thor came out the same day.
Thor came out. So of course it's completely overshadowed, and it's probably only relegated to small, art cinemas. But that graphic novel by Durf it's a revelation. It is so moving. And such a powerful book, especially if you like true crime.
We're going to move it over to Brian. Brian, what is your Wolf of the Week?
So a friend of mine here in Orlando who is an artist has done some work for us for Bear Bust. His name's Danny Haas, Haas. Danny had a Kickstarter, and I don't think I mentioned this, and I should have. This is a Kickstarter that was funded and backed successfully, but his book finally came out. Danny does this art style that's it's like take the page, split it in half, and you have sort of one version of a character on one side, a different version on the other side, and it's very distinctive. Other people have, I think, done similar things, but I believe Danny was the first to do it. His art book that he kickstarted came out finally, and I'm sitting here flipping through it, and like it is just absolutely just gorgeous visual imagery. Like I'm looking at his Daredevil sort of pages, and they're the Netflix version in and out of costume, and then the Marvel Comics version, both a red and a black kind of suited version. He's got pretty much all the major genre stuff covered, including Marvel, DC, Disney, Star Wars, some anime stuff, some kids cartoons. I know he's got a Moana, which is Disney. Anyway, I want to mention it because Danny's a super sweet guy. Has, like you said, he's done some great logo work over the years, and he's actually done some comic book work, even though he's still kind of like trying to break in to certain areas. But he did the covers for the Scholastic movie novelizations for Marvel.
Oh, neat.
So if you pick those up or see those in stores, that's Danny's art. Danny is Orlando based, but his website is artofdanny.com. You can see all of his cool stuff up there, order prints. I think he said he has enough inventory of these books that he might be selling some either at shows or on the web store. So you'll just have to check. But if you go to his website right now, I hadn't seen this one before. He has an awesome half and half. Oh gosh, what are they? The musicians that are dressed as robots. Why can't I think of their name?
Punk.
Thank you. So he's got a really sweet one. He's also started doing pins, like everybody and their brother who does enamel pins. And his pins are awesome because they're the same visual style, half and half. And he has one from the Haunted Mansion, which is great. And his most recent one is David Bowie. I am super stoked about getting that pin because it's Bowie, and I don't have any Bowie pins, but it's let's see if I can tell you the eras. It's Labyrinth era on the right and Ziggy Stardust era on the left. And he also sells those online as well, in addition to having like a pin of the month club kind of deal. So I would definitely go check out Danny, Art of Danny, Danny Haas. And if you see him at a show, he gets to a lot of the big conventions. Just tell him you heard about him on Comic Book Bears, and he'll laugh and say, "Oh, that Brian, he's sweet." Also, I will say, and he's totally cool with this. He is straight. He has produced offspring and is happily married to a woman. However, He is also very attractive, especially when he has his beard, and would not be upset if you called him a bear or, thought he was. He's very, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, we've been known to connect with the straight bears on this show, God knows. I'm looking at his art. There's some really nice stuff for Star Wars Celebration.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Oh, man, look at that. Man, that is nice.
Yeah, and I can also attest. I've met him at conventions as well. He's a great guy, and love flipping through his print book every time I go.
Nice.
So.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about a comic book, a collected edition actually, and I tend to be the DC zombie of the group, so I decided I'm going to break the trend here, and I'm going to talk about a Marvel book. And this is a collected edition of a miniseries that came out in 2011. The trade came out at that same time as well. Why I waited 6 years to read this, I will never know. Wolverine and Hercules, Myths, Monsters, and Mutants. It's written by Frank Thierry with art by Juan Santa Cruz. And in the book, they operate from the premise that Wolverine and Hercules have been friends for many, many years. In the book, Matsuo Matsurabaya, whatever the hell, the guy that murdered Mariko. He's the leader of the Hand, and he's back from the dead, and he has this mission. He's going to kill Wolverine once and for all. To do that, he recruits two of Hercules' deadliest foes, and through that, we see Hercules and Wolverine joining forces in action. Frank Thierry is one of the most underrated writers. He is so awesome at dialogue. He can put together a plot that is just airtight, and still throughout all of this, it maintains a level of fun. This artist, Juan Santa Cruz, I'm really not familiar with most of his art, but in terms of the manly form of Hercules and the monsters that inhabit the book, this series doesn't exactly bury the lead. Myths, Monsters, and Mutants. Just some really nice stuff. And like I said, I don't know why I waited 6 years to get this book, but I finally did. And that's my Woof of the Week. Well, this has been the latest episode of the Comic Book Bears. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears.com. If you want to listen to us, you can do so by subscribing to us through iTunes and also catch us through Stitcher Radio. And we also are on the Instagram and the Twitter and the Tumblr as Comic Book Bears. And our main focus point pretty much is the Facebook page where you can find us as Comic Book Bears Podcast. So until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
And I'm Steve Morey.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion, and we'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Woof!
We'll start searching that area immediately.